שמפה ועד ירושלים, ילדים Welcome, welcome. I'm a young זה הקרוסלה הזאת מותרת פה, אני הייתי עושה כספים כבר נורא, הייתי ממשיכה, אני רואה לשמור, אז אני אבקש כמה אני מסתיע אנשים, כן, קלף כזה, פרווה, דפקת לפעמים חיוכים.
Okay, let's start. So today we are in our second class, and we'll use this two interrelated purposes. One is to continue providing an introduction to the introduction of international relations. And second, we use this meeting to discuss how international relation theories capture the issue of technology. And this is one of the covering issues that will guide us during this course, because cyber, among other things, is a new technology. And the question is how international relation theory is dealing with technologies, how we can think of technologies, how technology affects international relations practices, and so on. So one of the ways to combine them is to use the article I assigned you for last week, the article of Erickson and Giacomello about cyber and international relation theories, and we use it to discuss not only how international relations theories capture the issue of cyber technology, but how we can use it to broaden the scope and to discuss how it relates to technology in general. So this will be the frame of this class. So one of the key elements that Erickson and Giacomello discuss in their paper is that international relation theories, some do it better, some are less successful, but in general are limited in capturing the cyber and the cyber domain. And this goes beyond the question of technology, because cyber is not only technology. We'll talk about this during this course, because it can also be understood as cyber is also.
And people live and interact.
I didn't hear the beginning.
living arena, like when people interact and
So
living
it's a
social phenomenon.
social phenomenon, right? So this is a social phenomenon that is mediated through technology. So it again is technology, but what else? Talk about cyber also as a space, right? Cyberspace. It's a domain. It's it's different from the other domain, from the kinetic domains, and this has implications for the way we can use our theories in international relations. So this is an issue we'll also cover during the course. But the second one is of cyber as a technology, and as both as technology and as a space, international relations are limited in capturing it to some extent, and we'll discuss it toward the end of the semester. To some extent, maybe theories from political geography would help us to better understand cyber technologies and how they affect international relations, because we can think of the cyber as a domain or as a space, and the scholars who study or develop theories about spaces are scholars from political geography. So we'll leave it now, but we'll get back to it later on during the course. But a challenge, or another challenge, is that we need a theory that, it's great that the theory could help us understand what's going on in the cyber domain and how we can account for interactions in the cyber domain and how it affects international relations and so on. But international relations is not only happening in the cyber domain. So we would love to have a theory that allows us to understand international relations both in the cyber domain and in the kinetic domain. And we still don't have such kind of a theory. So before getting back to the discussion of international relations theories, and I started last week to talk about the level of analysis, and I'll get back to it later on, but I want to start with a key distinction in the study of technology. And there are two main approaches for the study of technology in social sciences. One is what is termed as technological determinism. According to this theory, technology shapes the society. And the second approach is social constructivism. According to this approach, it is the society that shapes the technology. And the society shapes the technology in two meaningful ways. One, the society determines which technology to develop. And the second, the way a technology is implemented is determined by society. So we have the two opposite views on how, or the connections or interactions between societies and technology. And of course, this is a spectrum, so we have different theories in between these two poles. But basically, this is the main distinction. And we can, of course, discuss and look into each of these approaches. One element that we need to take into account when we discuss these issues is whether these dynamics are deterministic. So it's not only whether this is one way or another, but rather whether these effects or interactions are deterministic. For example, we can say that technology shapes society, as the first approach suggests. But whether this is a deterministic approach, is there some human agency in the process or not? get into that. It's a big question. There are not clear answers for these questions, but let's try to get into each of these theories. So let's start with technological determinism. And nuclear weapons as a technology is, I think, a good example of scholars who suggest that it is technology that shapes society. That once there is this technology, once this technology is introduced, it has a deterministic effect on human behavior and the way we can or should wage wars. For example, Bernard Brody, in a very famous paper from 1946, few months after the introduction of the atomic bomb nuclear in Second World War, suggested that the main purpose of armies in the new era is not to win wars, is to prevent them in the first place, because nobody can win a nuclear war. This argument was debated, of course, including by experts and scientists like Herman Kahn. I don't know if you've heard about him, but he suggested that we'll suffer millions of casualties, but we will win the nuclear war against the Soviets during the Cold War. His book was titled "Thinking the Unthinkable." The unthinkable is how to win a nuclear war. So these arguments are debatable, and there was a debate, although most of the scholars and experts suggested that Brody has it right. But what Brody suggests is an example of a deterministic argument about how technology shapes society. We cannot use not only the nuclear weapons for winning wars, but the purpose of the armies should be changed due to these technologies. We should work to prevent the wars because nuclear war cannot be won. This is basically the argument, and this goes. There is some logic for that. At that time, there were no technologies that could provide defense from nuclear weapons. So the only way to prevent a nuclear war was the only way to prevent the destruction from a nuclear war was to prevent their launching in the first place. And given the fact that they are destructive weapons, we should prevent their use. So deterrence became a very common strategy, or a very convincing strategy in this era when we have a destructive weapon that can kill millions, tens of millions of people, and there's no defense against it. But the idea was taken even further by other scholars, for example, by Kenneth Waltz, one of the leading international relations scholars in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And he had a debate with Scott Sagan. Scott Sagan, another leading scholar, about nuclear proliferation. And Walt's argument was that nuclear weapon will make actors be rational. We should provide more actors, more states to have the nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons dictate actors to be cautious. So his argument was, let's have all the countries that want nuclear weapons because they will fear that any crisis will escalate into a nuclear war, and therefore we will decrease the number of wars in the international system. This was world's argument. Again, this is a deterministic argument about the power of a technology. The technology will shape the actors and how they behave in the international arena. Any question? You can, of course, imagine that there are scholars who oppose this idea that there is a deterministic element of nuclear weapons. And here we have the social constructivist scholars, or social constructivism, as a way to think of these issues about how technology is shaped by society. And as I mentioned earlier, it is shaped by society in two meaningful ways. One, the society chooses to develop the technology. And we all know that the society, I mean, the nuclear weapon didn't came out of the blue, right? There were people who decided to develop these weapons. A day and a half ago, Oppenheimer won the Oscar. It shows very clearly how this was an outcome of people who decided to develop these technologies. It didn't happen. The technology doesn't have the power to develop itself. It is through a series of decisions and politics and knowledge and so on. And second, the question is how a technology is being used. And I think in the case of the nuclear weapon, it's even more important. The question is not only once, because one could argue, okay, of course, people, I mean, it doesn't come out of nowhere, the technology, people are developing it. But the question is what happens once we have the technology, whether at that time it has a deterministic effect on society, whether we can choose to use nuclear weapons for deterrence or for something else. And a number of scholars showed that unlike the argument of Bernard Brody, according to which nuclear weapon dictated the practices of deterrence, this wasn't the case. Not only because what Brody argued in the mid-40s was not very accurate, because these arguments are more relevant to the hydrogen bomb and not to the atomic bomb that they had at that time. But this is a different story. The main issue is that at that time, in the 40s, in the 50s, even in the 60s, in the United States, but mainly in the Soviet Union, people thought about having a nuclear war. There was this kind of strategy that is termed war-fighting strategies, or war-fighting strategies as a way to use weapons, in which the weapons are meant to be used in a battle. So despite the fact that there were nuclear technologies and nuclear weapons, they were not translated into a strategy of deterrence at that time. It took decades until the practices and strategies of deterrence were institutionalized. And this happened, for example, as a most prominent manifestation of this is the SALT agreement from the early 70s. In the early 70s, the two superpowers come to understand that we need to rely on deterrence as the only way to prevent a nuclear war. And they signed an agreement that unintuitively limit the ability to use what? No? It's one element of this agreement, but what is the core element of the SALT agreement? defensive weapons, the SALT agreement limited the ability of both sides, the US and the Soviets, to use defensive system in order to make deterrence more effective. Because the argument was that if we'll have defensive system, it will provide an incentive to make a first strike. So the way to stabilize the international relations arena and the dynamics between the superpowers was to limit the ability to use defensive systems. And this is non-intuitive because most of the governments are trying to sell the security of the citizens, right? They try to protect the citizen and rely on defensive systems to prevent such kind of situations. But the idea was that if we'll allow the requirement of defensive system, it will provide the other side an incentive to strike first. And what we want to have is the certainty, and this is MAD, mutual assured destruction, that if we'll be attacked, we could destruct the opponent, regardless who started the war. Once there was a nuclear war, this is a suicide for the other side as well, for both sides. There's no way to handle a nuclear war. And this happened only in the 70s, right? So it's not a deterministic effect. And now we have a lot of information about the dynamics that led to this agreement. And we know that there was seminars of Soviets and American experts who met in different forums and tried to develop these ideas of deterrence. It didn't happen from the nuclear weapons themselves. It happened from knowledge that was delivered between individuals. So this challenged the argument that the effect of the nuclear weapons is deterministic. There was a need to interpret these ideas and to think of the way to manage the nuclear challenge. Questions? So there are different additional decisions that were made to allow deterrence. For example, the acquirement of second strike capabilities and doctrines and so on. By the way, it was Brody, and again, when we think about this determinism of technology, Brody himself, who was kind of an expert of marine strategy, suggested that we will not need anymore the fleet, or what do you say? Right, that's it. We'll not need it anymore because of the nuclear weapons. But this was exactly the opposite, right? Because the submarines became a crucial element of the new war. So again, it is very difficult to predict how a technology will affect. And there are different unintentional and non-linear effects of technologies. And it depends also on human knowledge and human understanding and so on. So it's even Brody, who was an expert on this issue, didn't envision how the technology could be used in the future. Okay, so I'm going back to bear this in mind. We'll get back to technology later on. I'm going back to what we started at the end of last week about the introduction to international relations theories, and we discussed the level of analysis, right? We talked about the three levels of analysis: the individual, the state, and the system. And we discussed the fact that this could provide different lenses through which to think about explanations. So when we categorize international relation theories, we can think of theories that focus on one or another level. And this was the tendency in the 70s, in the 80s, even in the 90s, to have an explanation that focuses on one level of analysis. Now we have some explanations that combine a number of levels of analysis. For example, the individual and the system. But again, most of the scholars do focus on one level of analysis when they suggest their explanation, because there's a lot of to do with one level of analysis and one theory that you don't need, and you don't have space for a paper or for an article in which you could further elaborate and focus on different level of analysis. But this is the main distinction in international relations theory. So I just very quickly, theories on the individual level are theories that focus on psychology, mainly on psychology. We can think of other sources of explanation, but psychology is a main key, is a key source of explanation. When we talk on the state level, we can refer to the type of the regime as an explanation. For example, the democratic peace theory is about the regime of the state. It's not exactly at the state level, but it's also not at the system level, because, as I mentioned last week, it requires that the two states will be democratic. So it's not only on the state level, it's the two-state level. So it's above one state. But basically, it refers to the dynamics within a state that allow or disallow some kind of practices. We have interest groups, and a lot of theories in international relations that look into the state and the political bargaining in the state to explain international relations. For example, there's a lot of theories trying to explain European integration, starting from the state. For example, whether we as the European Union wants to accept another actor, another state into the union. We can explain it in different ways, but one of the ways is to look at each of the countries that constitute the European Union and see what's their opinion, what are the balance of power within the domestic politics with each of these actors. And this is important because in the European Union, as you know, there is a veto of each of the states that are part of the union that allow them to accept or not accept a new member. So the power politics in each country is very important. It doesn't end there. There's also politics at the level of the European Union institutions. But we can start the explanation at each of the country, whether they want to join the EU, whether they want to accept a new member to the EU, whether they want to change the constitution of the EU, and so on. So we can start at the interest group, and there are some actors who want to decrease taxes, and some actors who want like export taxes, and some that doesn't, and so on. So it's domestic politics play an important role in this situation. And lastly, we have the international system, and And we mentioned that we can think of balance of power as a systematic element of explanation. We'll further develop this argument when we talk about neorealism. But basically, this is one of the key ways that realist scholars explain dynamics in the international arena, because the balance of power is what changes, is what is changing in the system. The other elements are quite constant, like the actors themselves. We rarely see changes in the actors in the international system. They are continued to be the state as they were before. And anarchy, which I also mentioned last week, anarchy, the fact that there's no supreme authority above the state, is also something that is not changing. The only thing that is changing is the balance of power. And the balance of power determines what actors can do and what they cannot do. It, for example, explains stability or instability. And this is one of the main elements, or one of the main phenomena that realist scholars try to explain. When the international system is more likely to have a big war, like a Cold War, something like that, in which the great powers are involved. They are focusing mainly on great powers. So the question is, when the great powers are more likely to be involved in a war? And what are periods of peace? And there are different theories. For example, if we think of the balance of power, which kind of balance we can have?
You mean when there is a regional situation or internal?
In terms of global, the global or the international system, not regions, but
Elections, like in the area or in the time frame of elections.
no, but again, I'm looking at the international system and the balance of power among
One superpower, the
Yeah.
superpower.
Exactly.
several.
Exactly. So we can think of different structures of powers in the system. For example, we can have a period of time in which we have a hegemon. And there's only one superpower, because this hegemon is by far stronger than all the other actors. We have periods of bipolarity, when we have two powers, two great powers. And we have periods of multi-power system, like now, for example. And different scholars suggest that different structures of balance of power is more likely to lead to peace. So there are scholars who argue that hegemony leads to peace, or lack of war among between the superpowers. There are scholars who study how bipolarity is the way to lead to stability, like the Cold War. And there are scholars who are arguing that the multipolarity is what best explains stability. So you can, I mean, the criticism is, of course, if we have stability in each of these constellations, it might mean that stability cannot be explained by the balance of power. So this is one way to see it. But this is a very powerful explanation of neorealism, neorealist scholars. But we also can think of international norms as an explanation at the systemic level. For example, we mentioned that the way the structure of the international order today, based on sovereign states, is derived from the fact that we have a very strong norm of sovereignty. This is the norm that constitutes the international order.
Can you repeat
What?
what you just,
The norm? What to repeat? From where?
what you just said? I lost you.
About international norms? Yes. So, and I'm repeating the end of the last class, but basically we can think of explanations at the level of the system, not only using material explanations, but also ideational explanation. I'll get to it later on, but basically we can think of explanation at the system level that are based on international norms, explaining, for example, the current world order in which we have states that control a certain territory. And we can argue that this is an outcome of a very strong norm of sovereignty. Okay, so I mean, the norms can also account this kind of a different kind of explanation, and we'll discuss it during the course, because it's an ideation explanation. It's not a materialistic explanation as the neorealist scholars suggest, but it's another way to explain phenomena in the international domain. So what I would like you to do now is to take a few minutes, and before we get into more details about specific explanations of cyber and international relations, I wanted to form a small group, like 2 or 3, maybe 4, if you want, in which we'll provide or suggest explanation to phenomena or interactions in the cyber domain at different levels of analysis. So there's no right, or I mean, there can be right or wrong, but there's no only one right answer to this questions. You can have different kinds of answers, and there's different kind of ways that you can think of this issue, and you can think of different kind of phenomena you want to address in this. I mean, it's open for you. You can decide what kind of phenomena in international relations that is related to cyber you want to explain, and you can offer different kind of ways. You don't need to have a theory. You can have like an empirical explanation based on your knowledge of how we can try to explain different dynamics in the international arena that are related to cyber. So let's have like 10 minutes, something like that. And then we'll open it for discussion, and then we'll continue the class. You can switch places if you want.
Very
Okay, let's. I've heard very interesting ideas from the different groups walking here. It's great that it's a so vibrant discussion, but we need to continue. I try to provide opportunities in the future to continue have such kind of discussion, because I also think it's very productive that you share ideas, but also I can discuss with you in the group some specific ideas. So it's a very interesting way to just go over the material. So anyhow, let's hear your ideas. Each group will nominate one presenter, and could share some of the ideas the group developed. You don't need to share all the ideas, but what you think that are the ideas that you are more comfortable with, or you want to you feel that this is what you have to contribute to the discussion. So we want to start.
We will start.
Thank
The
you.
first and to finish it earlier. So we chose a cyber threat on critical infrastructure. Feel free, of course, to jump in. On individual level, we reviewed that through the psychological analysis, understanding the uncertainty in regards to individuals in the country, but also the national security and the society that is affected during this threat. And it's also affects the decision makers in the country. Did I miss anything in this section? Okay. The next one on the state level, so we looked that there is a lot of implications on cyber threat on critical infrastructure, including the vulnerability, the policy making, also in in thinking of the defensive approach and the offensive approach. What to do in order to prevent such thing, and which policy making the government need to implement, how the ecosystem in this country needs to prepare for such a scenario, and also what can they do in order to defend and to make the critical infrastructure more secure. There is also the aspect of the human rights, that we wrote it in two levels, in the state and the structure level, that because of the implication of the critical infrastructure, in case of such a scenario, it will affect the human rights in the state level, but also it will affect from the international level, from structure. Because if we're talking about, let's say, they have one that was hacked and something happened, so there is also effect on the international norms, international relations. It will change the balance in between of the countries. Also, we discussed that there is lots of norms, if it's from the European Union, that they signed in order to prevent such attacks of critical infrastructure. Because from one perspective, cyber hackers can be individual who did it, but if something like that will happen, it will affect the human rights of the people, it will affect the country and the worldwide norms.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
We found it very hard to separate the state level from the structural level.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things that we talked about, and we were not certain which level to put it in, like, and there were things that we put in both of them, although it's the same, like.
I would say that this level of the system is a very separated way, or very unique way to think about international relations, because it is something that need to characterize all the actors in the system. So it's all
So the deterrence is in
deterrence.
system level.
I mean, we could think of deterrence at a system level when we talk, for example, the Cold War. NATO and Warsaw Pact are not state level analysis of deterrence. It's the systemic level of balance of power, right? So it's not state. Court, on the other hand, could make a very convincing argument. It's not about NATO and Warsaw Pact. It's about the United States and the Soviet Union, so it's the state level, right? And you can also make the argument that it's not the state level, but it's the perceptions of policymakers and in these countries. So you can make an explanation based on the individuals. So, I mean, this is a very nice exercise showing how you can use the same phenomena and explain it at different level of analysis. Let's continue here.
Okay, so we analyzed cyber domain through all three levels: the individual, state, and structural level. We have looked at the lens of at individual level. We talked about hackers, you have your states, actors, your agencies, your consumers, and then your browsers. Serving the web. But then also we had this discussion about sovereignty and the fact that the cyber is a borderless entity. And so at the individual level, this kind of gives an opportunity to democratize sovereignty, because now someone can have their own marketplace, someone can have their own website, whether it's through like e-commerce. And so in that way, it's kind of this digital property, virtual property that someone can own because you are agreeing, like this is your space. So we discussed that and we realized it actually have implications at the structural level.
This is a structural argument that if all individuals having or can do something that without this technology they could not do, this is a kind of a systemic change. The question is what exactly you want to explain here, but I mean, empirically, this is something that can be approached from the systemic level, because we are not interested in one or another individual. We are saying that this is the change in how individuals all over the globe can act. So it's global phenomenon, it's a system level.
Yeah, it's also it's a little bit more challenging because if you think of the state in the traditional sense, the state is the one that provides security through that, unsigned, like not tangible contract that we sign, like the social contract. But here, actually, private companies, the ones that actually have to provide that security from, hackers stealing your data.
Well, thank you. We'll talk about it in who is the state is challenging as a security actors that we consume our security from non-state actors, and this is not entirely a new phenomenon, but it is exaggerated in the cyber domain, and we need to rely, not only we as individuals, but also the states need to rely on private company to provide security. So it is and we'll talk about it, it's kind of privatization of security. At the state level, not only of the individual, but also the state is purchasing security.
And that's where we also talked about like this issue between like the burden of the private sector and the public sector, where government contractors with them to redefine their influence through soft or hard, power over domestic reform population groups. And so this also leads more to like the issue of like problem of attribution, also the like backwardation of borders, and then essentially leading to the structural level that this is, like no one is.
So to some extent, it is kind of a systemic explanation showing how the technology itself creating changes that impact different kind of actors. And the question would be whether these are, following our discussion earlier about the technology, whether these are deterministic outcomes of cyber technology. For example, the problem of attribution. For example, what you mentioned that individuals can do different things that they cannot, that the state is dependent on private for security. Whether these changes are a deterministic outcome of cyber technology or technologies, or it is a constellation that evolved during time because of different kind of input that were added into the process over the years. So this is, this is one of the key questions when we think about how cyber technology shape humanity. Whether these are deterministic outcomes, and I, for example, will talk about it on the class on deterrence, because many scholars suggested that deterrence cannot work in the cyber domain because of the problem of attribution. But my argument would be that it is not a deterministic outcome of the cyber domain, And the ways to address this challenge, technology, but also in terms of knowledge and norms that would put into question this deterministic effect. Not that we don't have the proper attribution, but the question is whether this is the deterministic effect of the cyber technology.
I think it's all. The internet, I think that one of the state actors in the cyber sense that we talked about was, yes, you have your tech companies as actors, but also you have your ISP, like as an actor. Like you can't, if you don't have an ISP, then it's really difficult to have access to internet, which is why you have Starlink, which is why you have Amazon also trying to do something with the sidewalk project as well. So that was just another actor that we talked about. And then some of the challenges to all this is the fact that there are different types of internet. You have the dark net, and then you also have like the regular internet versus reality. Like there's no two types of reality here. So that complicates things a little bit more.
Thank you. Let's continue with this group. I mean, if you want, you can choose a number of, you don't need to cover all the issues that you discussed. You can share all the
Okay.
the ideas or
We discussed the impact of or the ability of individuals and groups to impact on the society through the media, social networks, and the cyber world, and we discussed it in the individual level, the psychologies that this is creating on the decision makers who control everything. So it's really changed the way that you operate and speak with the people, because you channels of discussion with the people. Then on the state level, we discussed the difference between type of regimes. So the democracy countries are more open society, and they are more exposed to impact from social network and from the web, rather than other countries like autocratic countries that are less to impact the society through the web or through the social network. And finally, on the system level, we discussed the ability of each person, each one of us, to impact the entire society, create a big impact on his country, society, or on the international society. So with busy, which is something that was not exist a few years ago, and currently it exists, and the impact of anyone, any individual in the world, can now impact everyone.
yeah, that's good. I'm just adding that this is an potential explanation that the technology provides this opportunity for individuals to act. Globally, the opposite argument would be that the ability to act is mediated through the big tech companies who can supervise, control, censor, and so on. These ideas. So whether everything can be globally have a global impact, or it is affected by different kind of gatekeepers that
And not only the companies, but governments like China,
Government,
firewall.
yeah, of course, the government also. So I mean, this is part of a debate about the technology, and again about how the effect of technologies.
Well, if you're not curious enough to figure it out, then you probably aren't going to make it anyway.
Sorry?
If you're not curious to try and figure out, for example, how to just use a VPN in China, then you're probably not going to do anything anyways. So like some barriers to access are not really barriers. It's like,
Yes, I mean, this is the point that people can communicate globally, and we'll discuss it during the course. An important argument of Joseph Nye saying that what technology changed is not only the ability to communicate globally, but also to communicate globally in a very low cost. This is the key, because you could use the telegraph, or you could use the telephone decades ago, but you can transfer now much more quickly and to transfer much more information in a short period of time. That this is the change. You cannot do it before. So if as you mentioned, the access became. I mean, you have more access to do this kind of
Like
thing.
doing it down, yeah,
Yeah.
like infrastructure, or
Yeah.
like knowledge, or.
Yeah, so there's exactly. Let's move to the back there.
We put the cybersecurity technology.
Uh-huh.
And we start from the structural level, we change not an army versus an army, it enables individuals to use cybersecurity technology to attack other states. So we think it's a structural level.
Uh-huh. So the ability of different kind of actors to have an impact on other actors at the global scale, or at the global arena, that they could not have the access or the ability to, similar to the previous group, that actors can act in a different way or different ways than what they could do in the past, because of the technology that allows them to do this kind of activities.
In the state level, we use Israel as an example of developing cybersecurity technology as a way to change the international relations with other countries.
Mhm.
You know, both on the military, but also on economical level.
Yeah.
For example, countries that Israel didn't have international relations, like the United Emirates. We said it and accelerated the agreements between countries.
Mhm. So
We can share technology.
exactly. So it's at the state level, it can be used. Technology itself, or trading technology, is a diplomatic tool. And a step before that is investing in technology is a tool for future technological diplomacy, or knowledge diplomacy, or thing like that. So the question is why Israel is investing in technology. One answer would be security. The other would be, for example, diplomatic ties in the world.
On the last level, on the individual level, we said, okay, there is a cybersecurity technology. On the individual level, we say, in the psychological level, it really doesn't change almost any of the behavior. Like, people know there is a risk, they use the same password, they use that. So they know how to security was, like how to.
I think that things became much worse, and not the same. They are much worse, because if someone would tell you, "Look, I gave you like 30 years ago," someone would tell you, "You can use your phone for free," and the cost for phone 30 years ago was much more expensive than today. Just we take transcripts of every conversation you had, or you will have, but you get the phone for free. My gamble is that many people, some would use it, but many wouldn't use this service. But this is what we're doing in all the applications we are using, right? That we abandoned our privacy for getting these kind of services. So I think to some extent it became worse. It's not the human behavior has changed, and we think of a world where there.
Test, you know,
So
or put to the test, because 30 years ago, when you would ask this question, it wasn't a reality, right? So when the reality came.
it is a reality for, I mean, people maybe were not aware of this, like, I mean, services like Gmail, Yahoo, and all these Gmail services that I mean, they are using it for this kind of targeting advertise, right? They have an economic incentive to trace your activity in order to better fit the advertisement to your consumption. I think that this people maybe are more aware now, but it's maybe too late because many experts are saying that we don't have a privacy anymore and we cannot control it. And actually, this is a very difficult. It is very difficult not to cooperate with these applications. For example, I get forms from school that like Google document that I need to fill in. I mean, this is mandatory because I mean, otherwise I need to go to the school and print it and bring something to school, but nobody does it today, right? You are expected to fill this form. So
It's not only that. I think that there's change in the mindset of the young generation that they think differently about privacy.
exactly, right. So again, if we go back, whether this is the deterministic change, whether this is the deterministic change of cyber technology, or it's how different kind of actors took advantage of the technology in order to make it seem as a deterministic effect. Sorry? Yes, but this is an empirical question, whether cyber technology necessitated that people would give up their privacy. It is not a characteristic of cyber technology, it allows it. It provides incentives to do it, but it's not a necessity that characterizes the cyber technology. It was taken. Yes, of course, I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you. Someone who are born into this age don't have much choice because he has been educated or she has been educated to these kind of practices. But I'm asking a broader question about whether the technology itself, is deterministic in this dynamic. And I'm not sure it's deterministic. I mean, it's not necessarily a characteristic of the cyber technology to limit people's privacy. I mean, it could be used in this way, but it can also be used in other ways. I don't know. I mean, you are saying not to agree.
But analyze the realm of mobile technology. It's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what age, no matter what language you speak. The minute you use mobile, the minute you have high access to internet, so most of your life is over there. So your privacy is over there. It is much more convenient.
Yeah, it is much more convenient, but it's not necessarily a characteristic of the technology. I mean, the fact that all these tech giants is taking.
I think it is. I think all of us, all over the world. I'm not trying to be deterministic, but we are influenced by that.
No, I'm not debating this argument. This is the situation now. But I'm asking whether this is a deterministic outcome of the technology, and I can think of a different timeline, different scenarios, like like a counterfactual in which the technology would have developed in a different way by different actors promoting the technology and using it, in which privacy is not as challenged as today. I mean,
an interesting example is what happened to Twitter compared to X. Like the personality of its owner influenced the structure and the people go to that platform.
Yes, but
How much the personality of the client's owners.
this is another level of I mean, this is individual level explanation about the technologies. But there is, I mean, I don't want to open this or continue this debate now because it's a huge debate. But it's an example of saying what I mentioned at the beginning of the class today. Not only whether or what are the impact of cyber technologies on societies, but rather whether these changes are a deterministic outcome of technology. Could we think of a different scenario? I mean, this is the question, and I'm not sure I can fully answer this question, but this is something that was to be thought of. Yes, any else? Or thank you.
So we started talking about on an individual level when it comes to cyber domain. We saw it as a source of application and something that maybe years ago could take us, I don't know, like 2 hours. Now it's just like at the ease of our hand, we can do it very quickly. Then we also saw it as a factor to facilitate also interpersonal dynamic, as it was previously said, like thanks to the cyber domain, it's borders don't matter anymore. We can talk to somebody that is miles away.
Yeah.
Easily. And we don't know whether this could go under the individual level or a structural level, but we also talked about privacy as under the cyber domain, we're both let's say the product of data, but also let's say the target of the data, where the data goes. So privacy also has a big role depending on what kind of data are we willing to give to the cyber domain, and where do we kind of draw a line when we say, okay, like this is a data privacy breach, and after that we don't want to give any other type of data. Then when it comes at the state level, I think Uri mentioned it, when it comes to like autocracies or even authoritarian regimes, these type of political actors are more prone to carry out cyber attacks. Because it also like levels the playing field compared to kinetic warfare, where it's more about tangible sources. But with the cyber domain, it's more about the intangible sources, and it's a lower cost but also higher efficiency kind of warfare. And then when we looked at the interest groups, we saw big tech giants that, of course, they're welcome at the table, and they also need to be taking care of the regulations, and are also affecting the regulations to some extent. And then when it comes to the structural level, we talked about the balance of power. As we said earlier, one of the key metrics under the cyber domain of power change, because it's not anymore about the, let's say, coal or who owns the petrol sources, but it's who produces the chips. And now we see like Taiwan raising as a very important actor, because most of the chip factories are located in Taiwan. So that is also a structural change of the balance of power.
It also may be, sorry for the interruption, it also may be, following your ideas, it also may be changing how we need to measure power.
Yeah.
So it's maybe connectivity is the new measure of power. Data, holding big data is a source of power. And it also becomes a source of power if you have the ability to analyze big amount of data, as the artificial intelligence technologies allow. So you don't only able to gather enormous amount of data, but you can analyze it in a very effective way that provide you incentive and power in the international arena, both as a state and as a non-state.
And it also brings the question of how we look at technologies, whether we, let's say, adopt technologies in order to help us achieve this new type of like power system. And yes, so like change, revolutionize, let's say, the industry of what is power, how can one achieve power, and how can one use the power to get more power.
Yeah, so this is a systemic, maybe a systemic change in if we think power is a key element that English actors in the international arena. So if we need to rethink power, this is revolutionary power. Maybe revolutionize international relations that do not necessarily think of power in them. And lastly, bad anything? I mean, you can.
Well, we get activity. The individual level. And provides connectivity to people across borders and the world. State level, and it changes the structural. We have multi distinctions in the state for the structural level and set up on the one hand, it is in the states and then international relationship Israel and Saudi Arabia. And global power is relevant.
Thank you. Raises different kind of issues that some of them will go over during the semester. Some very broad and important question that to have in mind what you think about this technology. Let's have a 15 minutes break, and then we'll continue with the. Okay, so let's continue to save some time because we don't have much time left. Please write your name so I'll integrate it with the list I have in my office. So we talk about one way to categorize international relation theories and explanation based on the level of analysis. The second way to distinguish between explanation in the international arena among theories is to distinguish between ideational and material explanation. And I alluded to this issue earlier, and we can think of explanation that are based on material elements, such as power, right? The balance of power is a materialistic explanation based on not on ideas, but rather on tangible objects that an actor holds. So neorealism, some extent neoliberalism, are theories that are emphasizing material power. The balance of power is the best example for that. So the explanation is based on material power that actors hold. And based on that, we categorize different actors, rank them, and by that we conclude some explanation theories about international politics. The opposite is the ideational explanation. Ideational explanation puts emphasis on non-materialistic elements such as knowledge, social constructions, norms, identity. They are not material objects, right? They are ideas. And international relations theories are divided between these kind of two camps, although there are also scholars who try to combine the two, having both material elements and ideation elements in the theories.
So can you come again? What is ideational factors?
Ideation factors such as social constructions, right? Norms, identity, knowledge. So for example, soft power is a non-materialistic element of power because it is about the attractiveness of your ideas, about your culture. It is not a material object that account for other actors' behavior.
Then like, could you also say that it's tangible versus intangible factors?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, these are ideas. They are not tangible by definition. The point is that they can shape tangible objects, right? When we think of, for example, and I'll get back to this example because it is very prominent exactly in this aspect of there are glasses. So, for example, nuclear weapons. When we think of nuclear weapons as weapons that can be used only for deterrence, it is a kind of a social construction. We construct them as weapons for deterrence, for example, not for war fighting. But in this way, we also have some tangible implications on actors' behavior and on the structure of power and how actors behave and so on. So there are tangible outcomes that are derived from the social construction, but the social construction itself is an idea. It's non-tangible element of world politics. We cannot see norms. We can see, I mean, at most of the time we cannot see norms, but norms can be institutionalized in international agreements. So we can see them. They are more tangible when they are part of an agreement. But we can have a norm like sovereignty, a norm that has not clear, that is not backed by a formal treaty or a document that says that this is our norm in the international realm. We have some kind of norms that derive from this norm, like the UN Charter and so on, that states are expected to respect the boundaries and the borders of other states. This derives from the idea of sovereignty, but it's not exactly the norm of sovereignty.
When you said knowledge, what do you mean?
Knowledge.
No, but I mean, like the knowledge to build a nuclear bomb, is it hard power or soft power?
The knowledge itself is, this is a good question. The knowledge itself is not material by definition. It's knowledge. It's not tangible. It's in my head. I can share with, unlike material objects that I cannot share them. I mean, I can deliver it to someone, but I can share knowledge, right? I can share knowledge and everybody can enjoy the knowledge I have. So this
cyber weapons.
This is exactly the next issue. So whether cyber technologies or cyber, I'm not sure how to say it in a way that is clear that it's non-tangible. But elements of cyber are in between the so the algorithm for example is knowledge, right? The
It's
algorithm,
also a tool. It's also a
yeah, so I can put it into a device and then it will have some kind of tangible impact on actors. But I can say I mean the algorithm itself is the knowledge. It's not I can share it. I can refuse to share it with some actors, but I can share it. The algorithm itself, the knowledge, as you mentioned, the knowledge how to build a bomb is knowledge. It's not a tangible object until it becomes, the knowledge is implemented in a device or in tools. But I mean, this is a kind of categorization. As such, it draws clear lines between two elements, but in fact, there are some ambiguity when we try to discuss specific issues. There are some ambiguities, especially when we think of cyber. So we have we have in international relations three main paradigms, big theories, and they are paradigms in the sense that these are very broad theories. From them, we can derive various kind of explanations. So neorealism or neoliberalism or constructivism is not an explanation by themselves for phenomena in international relations, but rather they provide directions as how to develop explanations in international relations. And they do it by two main ways. One, each paradigm suggests different research questions, different directions as what should be studied in international relations. For example, neorealism would argue that we need to focus on great power. Okay? Great powers, the great powers of world politics. And we need to look at the balance of power. As I mentioned earlier, we can have different theories about international stability. We have the unipolar stability, the bipolar stability, and the multipolar stability theories, all derived from the idea that we need to focus on great powers and to focus on the power of the actors. Okay, we can work with these kind of assumptions or this kind of directions studying international relations. So the paradigm provides the research question or the research questions and the directions to answer this question. What to focus on great powers. How to study them? Look at the balance of power. Okay. Some of the paradigms in international relations are much more sophisticated than the neorealism, like neoliberalism, which has various kind of elements, or the constructivism. And it's maybe too early to say, but just as a side note, I don't think that constructivism is a paradigm as neoliberalism and neorealism, because it's even much broader in its scope than the other two paradigms. But maybe I'll get into that later on during the semester. But for now, think of it as another paradigm. So neorealism assumes that there is anarchy, that international relations, the world, is characterized by anarchy. Again, anarchy not as a chaos, but rather as the absence of a supreme authority above the state. And the fact that there is anarchy led really scholars to a very pessimistic conclusion about world politics, because if there is anarchy, it means that states should rely on themselves. This is the idea of self-help. That is a key element in neorealism. The self-help means that states should protect themselves, otherwise they will not be able to survive in the international arena as states. And Mearsheimer, one of the most prominent really scholars living today, John Mearsheimer, refers to it as the 911 problem. 911 as the number of the police in the US. He wrote this paper he wrote this book in 2001 when there was 9/11. But this is the same idea. There's no police that will come to help the state. Right? There's no international police, there's no supreme authority that the government can call and ask for help. The state should be strong enough to protect its territories and citizens. So neorealism assumes that we have a world of states where the most powerful actors are, of course, having we can categorize states according to the power, and we see that strong powers or powerful actors have a much more impact in world politics.
Oh, sorry, you said the world of states, that what?
Yes, so they are focusing on state. The
Okay.
neorealists are focusing on states, and since the power of the states is a key characteristic, we need to focus on great powers and not only states in explaining international relations phenomena. As I mentioned earlier, the question whether there will be a big war in the system, like a war among superpowers or between superpowers, is determined by the balance of power. So small countries, small states do not affect the chances of big war. So from this perspective, I mentioned it last week, but from this perspective, Second World War would have happened anyhow, regardless whether Hitler was in Germany or not. This is kind of the constellation of world politics. There is the balance of power, or the instability of the balance of power that would lead to a big war. This would be the realist argument about the Second World War, and the same would be applied for the First World War, or on the contrary, to the Cold War. The Cold War is a period of stability because of the balance of power, because it was a bipolar system that each superpower could balance each other. We'll have a much more nuanced discussion on neorealism, but this is just a brief exposition in order to discuss the question of technology and science. So I mentioned this. I mentioned this earlier. So we have different kind of explanation of neorealist explanation about power and how it affects international actors. But I'll upload the slide so you can go over it. But I've mentioned all the slide on the previous slide was discussed earlier. So neorealism sees technology as a resource that the state has. Okay, it's kind of a resource. It's not exactly tangible, but it can be used for producing weapons. It can be used for boost the economy. And while the focus on hard power, it should be mentioned that hard power is not only military capabilities, but also the economy of the state. Because for realists, if you have money, you can translate the money into weapons. So it doesn't matter whether you have weapons or military capability or you have money. If you have money, it can be easily translated. You can purchase tanks and air jets and whatever you need. So, I mean, if you are a superpower and you have money, you can do this. You can enhance your military capabilities. So it doesn't really matter. So you can measure state power by looking at the GDP of the country. Not necessarily GDP per capita, which is important, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the state power, because small countries can have a very high GDP per capita, but they are not very strong countries. For example, Monaco, or I don't know, Liechtenstein, exactly. That they have banks and have very they have a very high GDP per capita, but they are very small and weak states in terms of ability to protect themselves, because it is a very high per capita, but it's a small country, so they don't have many citizens. So the equation, if you multiply the number of citizens with the GDP per capita, you don't get a very high number. on the opposite, countries like China, which has a lower GDP per capita, but many citizens, is a very powerful country. And the same is, of course, United States or Europe, and so on. So for neorealist scholars, technology is a resource used by states. So the technology itself is not important, but as for other approaches or theory, it is a tool or a resource that the state can use to advance its capability. Of course, technology can change the balance of power. This is important. For example, there is a new technology that actors understand how to use it. It can be translated into a very powerful military tools, for example, AI. It can change the international balance of power, but it doesn't change the idea that we need to look at the balance of power, right? The balance of power is a key, continues to be a key characteristic that shape international politics. So, and also this is something we mentioned earlier. So new technologies may change the balance of power or determine strategic alternatives. So, for example, there is a period of time we need to rely on deterrence. There are periods of time, and we'll discuss it 2 weeks from now when we talk about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, on the offense-defense balance. It may change the balance of power. It may change the defense-offense balance. What is superior to defend or to preempt? Right? It depends on technologies. The technology affects the strategies of states. But if you're a powerful country, you could rely on the most advanced technologies, and you can use them for your security. Sometimes it will be more difficult, because if we living in an era where the offense has the advantage over the defense, it will be more difficult to secure your state. But it can be achieved, but it's more challenging than periods of time where the defense has the advantage. So from this perspective, for neorealist scholars, cyber technologies, cyber power do not change the theory's core assumptions, right? Power is important. The cyber technology, as any other technology, is a tool or resource that the superpowers can use. And therefore, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, I mean, it doesn't matter, it can change who is the superpower, but it doesn't change or challenge the theory itself. They would, we had an interesting discussion earlier about what power is. This is not how neorealists would define power. For them, power is still the hard elements of power, like having military capabilities and using them. There are also, some of the criticism of neorealism is that, well, we can have power, but we don't know how to use the power. For example, they have a very inappropriate doctrines for using the power they hold. And a good example for that, with no offense, is France during the Second World War. They have tanks, but they have a very poor doctrine to use the tank. They put one tank in each kind of base, and the next one will be like 1 kilometer from there. So they could not hold a very powerful tank, war fighting capabilities.
Is it not also the story with the Russian in the Ukraine? The 75 kilometer queue when they went into Ukraine. They had power, they had tanks, they had soldiers.
Yeah, I don't know, but maybe it's poor intelligence. Maybe yeah, it's a kind of example. I'm not sure what happened there, but the fact that Ukrainian could easily target these tanks was not a very useful way of using them in the field. But I'm not sure whether it is a doctrine failure. It's a kind of a misinterpretation of the situation or what happened exactly there. But in France, it was kind of a new technology at that time. They didn't know how exactly to use it. So it is not only the capability itself, but also the doctrine that shape how to use the technology. But this remains out of the scope of neorealists. For neorealists, you have the tanks. We count it as a source of power. So this is a challenge to the neorealism, and also what we mentioned earlier about connectivity as a source of power, knowledge as a source of power, like data sets and so on. So
why neorealism doesn't look at data?
because they are focusing on hard power, only hard power. So they would count. They can have it indirectly. For example, they would rely on economy, on the budget of military, the state budget of the military budget. And if you are a very powerful country, if you have a big budget, you can spend it on purchasing technology, right? You can do it, but it is not part of the way they exactly calculate the balance of power. If you have the money, it is almost deterministically translated into being a powerful country. This is how they rank. They just rank the military budget, the state budget, and draw from this conclusion about the balance of power among states. The doctrine remains out of the scope, for example, of this calculation. So or the assumptions of neorealism are also not challenged by cyber technologies. They argue that anarchy is a characteristic of international relations. The cyber technology did not change that. And again, I sometimes get in the exam answers like anarchy, cyber technology promotes chaos, therefore realists are right in their assumptions about world politics. This is not what neorealists think about anarchy. Anarchy is not, as I mentioned, chaos. And we can make an argument that there is a chaos in the cyber domain, although there are also hierarchies in the cyber domain, as we talked earlier about the actors who regulate cyber domain and so on. But regardless of what I just mentioned, they would argue that international relations with cyber technologies and without cyber technologies are characterized by anarchy, and this is not changed. So technology does not change the core assumption, and they would argue that states are the main actors in world politics. And this is also something for them that has not changed.
So they do not refer at all to the
Yes. I mean, there are some ways to connect these companies to neorealism. For example, to argue that the states has some of control over these companies, or to argue that states can use these companies for in different ways, including for collecting taxes. So the fact that they are selling that, like Apple sells a lot of smartphones, boost the American economy. Okay, so I mean there are ways but it's not an important actor by themselves. This is challenged, of course, by other scholars who argue that we cannot ignore these kinds of actors, and we talked about it earlier. But for them, it's not really different from what we have with transnationalism and with globalization. Globalization is not new, right? So these technologies make globalization more intensive. There are more actors influenced and shaped by globalization, but it's not a new phenomenon. And also, they would argue that domestic politics, and this is another element that characterizes neorealism, domestic politics doesn't matter for international relations. Because what shapes international relation is
The interaction between states.
the balance of power. So it doesn't matter, domestic politics doesn't matter whether it is a democratic or autocratic regime, whether we have a certain individuals in the government or not. This is not part of the explanation. And again, cyber technologies, according to them, do not change these issues.
But what about like the capacity or stability in domestic politics? Does that affect the fact?
What you mean by that? I didn't understand what you mean.
There is issues in domestic politics that
Like okay, so it can be translated into state power if it would affect state power. Like, for example, there are domestic instability, the prosperity is slowing down, the economy is not so good. It would affect the state. It would affect state power.
Right.
So this is a way to take it into account, but it is not part of the explanation itself. It would be one of the determined or one of the sources that affect the state power, and as such, it has an international effect. But by itself, it's not part of the explanation. And again, they are not saying that domestic politics is unimportant or irrelevant. But if we want to explain the core element of world politics, which is a war among the superpowers, we don't need domestic politics for that. Or we can pay the price of ignoring domestic politics in order to make the explanation more parsimonious. So, like parsimonious is chesroני. Like, we don't need much variables. We need only one variable.
Is it a theory that is still supported, like something that is dominant nowadays?
The neorealism?
Yes.
The neorealism is like an ideal type of a theory. There are still scholars, I mean, prominent scholars who are thinking through these lines. The neorealism of measurement awards is a very theoretical lens, and not much scholars are using it as such. And there are different variations. We will talk about it during the course, like what is called as neoclassical realism, which try to combine different assumptions. But for your question, yes, there are. I mean, this realism. Most of the scholars at I'm not sure that most of the scholars, but many of the scholars in certain regions are very realist. scholars, especially in the United States, in the Middle East. In Europe, for example, we see more neoliberal and more constructivist approaches dominating the academia on international relations, but also there are many realist scholars. But of course, neorealism has tremendous difficulties encompassing cyber technologies, and we mentioned some of them earlier. First, and this is the more easy challenge, the challenge that can be more easily addressed by a neorealist scholar is whether the main concepts are still relevant, like deterrence, like balance of power, like offensive defense, the security dilemma, and so on. Whether these concepts are relevant or not, and scholars suggest that they are relevant. Some would suggest, I mentioned it also last week, the fact that it is more difficult to deter in the cyber domain doesn't mean that the realist theories about cyber deterrence, about deterrence are irrelevant. They're just explaining why it is difficult to deter in the cyber domain. So the theory is still relevant. So there are some challenges, some difficulties, but this is not the main issue, not the main challenge that new realist theories are facing. The more pressing issues are the question of power. Who are the powerful actors in the international system? For example, the inability to capture the non-state actors in the cyber domain is a tremendous limitation of neorealism. Because for neorealism, there is only one kind of actor in the international system, which is states. Even before the cyber technology, they overlooked other kinds of actors. And there are different kinds of actors in world politics, such as, in here, which kind of actors we have in international relations?
Terror organizations.
Terror organizations,
Non-profit organizations.
civil society, NGOs, and international organizations, right? We have different kinds of actors. They overlook all these kinds of actors because for them, international organizations are not independent actors. They are reflecting the interest and power of the great powers. So why we have the UN? Because it reflects the international balance of power or the interest of the great powers. Why we have the NPT? Because it was the interest of the great powers to limit the ability of other actors to acquire nuclear weapons and so on. So it's the interest and power of the actors who are forming these kind of institutions. There are some limitations to this explanation, and we'll talk about it when we discuss neoliberalism, because according to the neorealist explanation, if it's the power and interest of the great powers, then we should have expected a shift in these institutions, because the UN or the Security Council of the UN is clearly reflecting the balance of power of the late 40s. But it didn't change. So maybe the other elements are also affecting these institutions, not only the power and the interest of the great powers. But
The power didn't really change.
really, did think that France is one of the big five in world politics, or UK? I mean, this can easily be debated. And this is some of the argument of states, of different states, even in the global south, arguing that they should be part of or at least get the same privileges as the UK or France. So nobody debate about whether China is a great power, whether the United States or even Russia is a great power. They said we are also at least as powerful as these actors, so we need to be addressed in a similar way. So the fact that this institution didn't change maybe requires to think of other explanation that is not, that cannot be reduced to the power, and we'll discuss it later on. But for them, international institutions doesn't matter, but also for neorealists, international institution doesn't matter, and also domestic actors and other non-state actors are not important. But we see that in the cyber domain, there are crucial actors. We cannot overlook these actors, right? Like, what is the international relations in the cyber domain without these big tech giants? And what is international relations in the cyber domain without all these individuals and small firms operating in the cyber domain? So of course, they are not affecting the chance, not necessarily affecting the chance of violence among the superpowers. But the question is whether this should guide us as the key issue of international politics in these days, right? So there is a challenge. I don't know what they are cooking there.
Yeah, it's your.
Here is a dish.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so let's have this second bullet and conclude this class for today. So at the same time, we can ask questions about the state as a key actor in world politics. So not only states are relatively less effective as actors comparing to the kinetic domain, but not only that we see non-state actors as important actors, but also the state is not necessarily a key actor in the cyber domain as it was in the past. So I'm not saying that the state is not an important actor. Of course, it is an important actor. Of course, it is an important actor in the cyber domain, but it is less important than it was in the past. And one argument that can be, and this is a kind of a realist argument supporting this idea, is that there are those who say that one hacker can make a lot of damage, right? But if this is true, an organized army of hackers can cause a lot of damage. So this is what states can do. So states are still a powerful actor in the cyber domain, and they can organize hackers, if you will. So if we can rely on individuals as a source of power in the cyber domain, if we are able to organize and coordinate their activity, we can achieve much influence and much impact in the cyber domain. So, I mean, we shouldn't abandon the idea that the state is an important actor, but we should also encompass the fact or include or integrate into our theories or need to think of how to do it. Of course, the fact that there are also non-state actors that are prominent, especially in this kind of domestic politics or international level, like the tech company and so on, less about international institutions. We don't have much international institutions regulating. We do have some, but we don't have much international institutions regulating international politics regarding the cyber domain, as we have in the kinetic domain. And we'll discuss when we talk about international regimes and international organization, we'll discuss the question why we don't have these kinds of organizations in cyber domain as we have them in the other domain, like the UN or in other constellations. So I'll end the class here. We'll continue this discussion next week. And also we'll discuss the issue. The issue of sovereignty. So the main issue next week will be sovereignty, and it also allows us to allude to some of the questions that we discussed today, also in the discussion in the group. So yeah, see you next week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They want we sign it.